Countering Antisemitism in African American Culture. The floor is yours. Thanks.
All right, thank you. So honored to be here. I wanted to do a hip hop lesson with us before we get started. So I want everybody to stand up. All right. Oh, sit down, sit down. All right, so I'm going to say microphone check, and I want you to say 1 2 1 2. You got this? All right, microphone check. 1 2 1 2. All right. I want you to, if you can, stretch as much as you out, and I want you to give yourselves a hug. There we go. And I want you to repeat after me. I love me some me.
I love me some me.
There we go. I love my culture.
I love my culture.
I love my identity.
I love my identity.
I love my people.
I love my people.
I love me some me.
I love me some me.
All right, I want you to repeat. I'm going to say hip. I want you to say hop. Hip.
Hop.
Hip.
Hop.
All right.
That was the best lesson of the program.
Yeah, we can go home now.
Well, I mean, but what you just exercise you went through is affirmation. It's affirmation. Hip hop and its origin story, it brought value to communities that have been marginalized, underinvested, that people had really gave up on. But the strength and beauty of hip hop and people creating this powerful music that now is global. It's global. I was walking down the street and there was a guy out there and he was rapping. And I just stopped and he had the beats. And I was like, wow, like hip hop is everywhere in the world, right? And so part of that beauty is that it affirmed people's identity, their history. It said, look, we're not going to allow the streets, as messed up as they are, to define who we are. We are going to become something much more powerful, and we're going to teach through our music, through our lyrics, the importance of accepting and recognizing your identity and believing in yourself, that you're much more than the conditions that attempt to define you as a person. That's very important. In that origin story, the authentic voice found in hip hop has profoundly affected generations for more than 4 decades, with the classic pulsing 808 bassline beats, metaphorically laced MCs rocking new stylistic dress codes and mural taggings provide spectacular visual displays and industrious engineered breakdance maneuvers. The culture of hip hop has indeed defined and influenced Generation Xers, Millennials, Generation Zs. The global community embraces what came out of the boroughs of New York, right? That came out of Harlem and Brooklyn, right? And South Bronx. Pioneers of the industry like Grandmaster Flash, right? Kool Moe Dee, Curtis Blow, Sugar Hill Gang. They were the reporters for a community denied access to quality media coverage. The media too often saw urban residents, inner city residents, and disadvantaged environments as complicit agents of their poverty and violent crusaders for chaos and dysfunction. The humanization that came from the sounds and messaging of hip hop countered the misperceptions and misinformation that vilify urban communities. Hip hop declared to the world, post-civil rights and anti-Vietnam, that ethnic enclaves of people, particularly black and brown folks, right, and our Jewish brothers and sisters, right, that we had a valuable voice, a synergy for radical change. The artists captivated the dreams minorities harbored about a brighter future to uplift themselves and their communities out of poverty, right? So it's not coincidental that a lot of the grassroots people who started hip hop, they were conscious rappers, right? Their lyrics of hip hop were like a survival guide to our community, similar to the Negro Green Book or Black Book that taught one how to navigate racial and economic marginalization. Words from conscious hip hop messengers reviewed important cultural principles and tenets, renewing the spirit of Malcolm X, the Black Panthers, and other nationalist teachings for the hearts and mind of youth. People from this era were proud to rock the Malcolm X hat or show off an African medallion or Egyptian ankh, symbolizing change, agency, and societal transformation. More than anything else, hip-hop challenged how individuals from these communities perceive their realities or shortcomings, right? So it was KRS-One said knowledge reigns supreme over nearly everyone. Like, you have to read. Like, when you had a book bag, when hip-hop started off, everyone had a book bag and there were books in it. And it was conscious books, right? And the belief was you had to seek knowledge from the cradle to the grave, right? Now, what happened? right? Now, how do you get trap music that celebrates sex slavery of women? How do you get drill music that is really honor killing rappers when they insult each other, right? How do you devolve to anti-Semitism? How do you celebrate misogyny? Man, how do you use the N-word more than a Klan member throughout your song, right? So there is a shift that happened in hip-hop as corporatocracy, right? We call it globalization, takes over. Hip-hop becomes commodified. So to get that real hip-hop, you have to go underground. You have to go in San Francisco, in the Bay Area underground, and get that type of music. You have to go underground to areas where people are very diverse and accepting of everyone in that space, that you're here as a community, right? And that is the beauty and power of hip hop. But what saddens me, even during this lecture, and it's harmful to our Jewish brothers and sisters, is the fact that you see mostly black men who look like me being anti-Semitic. And some of it is out of ignorance, because through the conscious music, there are vehicles that come up and surface. I know Ice Cube don't want to hear this, but anti-Semitism comes into hip-hop because of Pan-Africanism, right? Black Hebrew Israelites, the whiteness theory, and we know Louis Farrakhanism. These are the four areas. Through the conscious era of teaching, knowledge reigns supreme over nearly everyone. Then we have the information also being fed that speaks to these scholars who say, yeah, you must learn your identity, you must love yourself, but you also need to know this information as well, right? So in that spirit, there's something that I want to really touch on here that's harmful messaging from Kanye West, right? But Kanye, like some artists that use use anti-Semitism, a lot of the first part of this is talking about Afrocentrism and how it really taught anti-Semitism to its artists, right? Afrocentric hip-hop certainly provided a conscious voice for artists during hip-hop. The music served to speak against racial oppression while restoring the beauty of black ancestry connection to Africa. Afrocentric hip-hoppers used their Pan-African references of Marcus Mosiah Garvey, right? Up Ye Mighty Race, Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois, and Malcolm X. The intellectual scholarship also fueled the messaging cast in hip-hop by notable figures like Dr. John Henry Clark, Chancellor Williams, Dr. Ben Jochanan. The Afrocentric intellectuals declare Africa as the origin of humankind, noting the historical achievements and gifts springing forth from the diaspora. At the same time, they lent themselves to what became known as the replacement theory, And from the Afrocentric point of view, what is the replacement theory for them? It suggests that the original Jews are Ethiopic and begin their historical trek from Ethiopia into Egypt. The Jews split into various tribes after Moses and the emancipation of Jews from Egypt. The various tribes would migrate to different lands, spreading their religious views into Europe. And this is where we get our Ashkenazi Jews, and this is a direction they go into, that after World War II, Afrocentrists suggest that Ashkenazi Jews would eventually become the face of Judaism and dominate the faith's historical trajectory into Israel. Afrocentric scholars such as Leonard Jeffries assert that the state of Israel is a white colonized territory carved out by Western nations that replaced the Palestinians and prescribed the European or Ashkenazi Jew as a hierarchical status in Israel. According to Dr. Ben Jochanan, now a lot of these books, Black Man of the Nile, my father had this book and I would read at it. And so when, I was going through the book and it was interesting. I found this quote where he asserts the fact that, Ethiopian Jews were replaced by Ashkenazi Jews and not really accepted as being Jews, right? And so that's the type of anti-Semitic rhetoric that a lot of hip-hoppers and Generation Xers are listening to and reading and becoming conscious, right? And that becomes problematic. And so it's no coincidence that, you're going to hear something from Kanye, because Kanye West is of the same generation that read the same books. And yeah, I'll play what he has to say.
He said a prayer for 8 minutes.
Oh, wait, I gotta.
They hit him with the fentanyl.
I don't want you to hear that part.
Funk ass motherfucking nigga. Say, and I just want to say, the next police shooting, ain't no white people gonna die. Y'all ain't gonna do nothing like folks. No justice, no peace. Let a nigga come through your neighborhood. You gonna try to kill him just for getting lost. White.
I'm sorry y'all had to hear all that.
This, yeah?
Yeah, I'm gonna move it to the okay. All right. All right, here we go.
I gotta tell you something. Where is a black guy that has a Jewish person signed to him? Point it out. Tell me that. Where's a black person that's signed to a Jewish person? All of them. Basically 90% of them. On TMZ, I just saw yesterday, it said Pete Davidson and Kim have sex by the fireplace to honor their grandmother. It's Jewish Zionists that's about that life, that's telling this Christian woman that has 4 black children to put that out as a message to Q, because Q been labeled an anti-Semite. First of all, we are Semite. We Jew, so I can't be anti-Semite. Right. First of all, people have owned the black voice, whether it's through us wearing a Ralph Lauren shirt, or it's all of us being signed to a record label, or having a Jewish manager, or being signed to a Jewish basketball team, or doing a movie on a Jewish platform like Disney.
All right, I'm gonna stop it there.
Our culture with the dark.
Yeah, and I think you heard enough, right? But I think what thank you, El Shaddai. What I think is important too is that the whole rhetoric of, that you can't be anti-Semitic, as we heard from the professor. That's a European term to begin with, but the Afrocentrics taught that, okay, if the Ethiopians were the quote-unquote original Jews, then through the African lineage, then we are Semitic people too. This is how it is taught. So, like, I know it sounds very crazy, but it's when you are oppressed and your identity is constantly marginalized, you're looking for hope and you're looking for messages that give you a sense of purpose and identity, right? And so the value of hip hop does that. But at the same time, some artists take in other messaging that isn't good, right? And so in that, this is where anti-Semitism lives and breathes. And this is the challenge. And then again, Pan-African scholars are edified and deemed, Pan-African scholars are edified and deemed in hip hop as being intellectual warriors, right? Through the music, you can hear people mention John Henry Clark, mention Dr. Leonard Jeffries, mention Rudolph Winsdor in his book From Babylon to Timbuktu that kind of reports the same negative messaging. But they're seen as these intellectual warriors. And Professor Griff, member of Public Enemy, he also was the Minister of Information in Public Enemy. He's made some very insulting anti-Semitic rhetoric as well, and that's very harmful. And so again, they get this lens through a lot of the Afrocentric scholars, right? And then so it is really in this 80s era, Public Enemy and the golden age of hip hop, that Afrocentrics really promote this anti-Semitic rhetoric, right? About the Ashkenazi Jew being the white Jew, right? And as a result, this is where the problem comes in. So even when we have individuals like Nick Cannon, right, who considers himself a black Hebrew, or we have him and Professor Griff, they're arguing, they really are repeating Dr. Leonard Jeffries. They're repeating Dr. John Henry Clark, right? All right, I may need help again. Okay, I think okay. Okay, all right.
With the Honorable Minister Farrakhan being silenced on Facebook and other platforms, because they attempted to silence Minister Farrakhan right now, and they did the exact same thing to you. If the true children of Israel are black people, why is it such a problem to speak the truth?
It became a problem for us because of the propaganda machine. But it's more of a problem for them. They've taken our birthright.
They don't want us to be them.
They don't want us to be us. They don't want you wrapping your head.
Right.
You understand?
Even though we are the true Hebrews.
Exactly. So we can't even tell the truth now. Not on record, not on television shows.
If that's truly our birthright, there's no hate involved. It's not. How did this message get so misconstrued?
When we came back to claim it. If you steal my bicycle when we were 6 years old, and you riding around the hood with my bike, and now I'm 12, and I understand.
I want my bike back.
Yeah, and so this is just repeated anti-Semitic rhetoric. So being conscious just means that you are intellectually aware. You're intellectually aware of who you are, your environment, how you can shape and be progressive in the world, right? And so this rhetoric was denounced in the 80s, right? It still flourishes today. And it flourishes in different ways in which I'll share eventually. We've also know about the black Hebrew Israelites. There's a lot of negative views that the black Hebrews have. But there have been hip hop artists that were black Hebrew Israelites and also celebrated some of the teachings through their music, right? There's extremist leaders such as Yahweh Ben Yahweh, who, in the late 1990s, he was arrested for child pedophilia, but at the time, he really embraced this Afrocentric replacement theory and taught his followers that, again, Ashkenazi Jews are colonizers, oppressors. They hijacked the religion, they gangstered the religion. You hear that, and as well that since 1969, the black Hebrew Israelites have been trying to get into Israel. for not only to push for U.S. reparations, but also reclamation land rights, saying that they are the original Jews, right? They have a lineage to the original Jews. Now, what's interesting, the black Hebrew Israelites, they get painted with a broad brush, right? It's very absolute when you mention them because there's a fraction in there. There's another fraction like Prince Asiel and Ben Amin, who they felt like, look, we accept the religion of Judaism, we convert, and we want to move to Israel to escape persecution from the United States. So many of them have moved to Israel. My wife's family were that part of Prince Asiel, which was situated in Chicago, and they didn't move to Israel. But her name, Aliyah Levi, right? So their last names are Levi. My wife knows how to read Hebrew, and they really believe in the belief of Judaism, right? But that fraction isn't this replacement theory, right? So there's, like anything else, there are people who will differ and disagree, but this fraction here, black Hebrew Israelites, are very extremists, and they constantly mention this, we are the original Jews. So again, in the music from our artists, right? Because our artists are humans, they're fallible, they listen to this stuff, and so they message it in their music at times, right? I think another big theme here, and I know we've been talking about this a lot, is the whiteness theory, which is huge, and we have mentioned this earlier today and throughout the seminar. But despite the Jewish people's glorious history of overcoming oppression and possessing a sovereign democratic nation, contemporary anti-Semitism remains more vital than ever. Many people in the world community continue to consign Jews to tropes and archetypes, especially about controlling specific industries and economic structural arrangements. Unfortunately, some African American community members assert that Jews are white people who help to protect and maintain an oppressive order and work to marginalize ethnicities such as African Americans. With their struggles being so similar, how is it that these two ethnic groups at times collide over identity, class, and racial matters where their efforts are similar? The whiteness theory explains how it impacts African Americans and Jewish American allyship. The theory suggests that since the mid to late 20th century, the post-World War II era, ethnic groups who were once marginalized and skewed as the other became white, which changed their social and economic status. Before this, specific groups such as the Italians, the Polish, the Irish, and Jews were the victims of similar racial attacks and deficit categorization as African Americans. However, these European groups could assimilate over time because of their white skin, something African Americans could not do, allowing them to become a dominant cultural member. So, of course, this is from Noel Ignative, who wrote a book, How the Irish Became White, right? And so in that, he's talking about how these European groups in America accepted and embraced the whiteness theory. They were really pushed into it, more so than embracing it. Through this same lens, Jewish people began, and this is the belief of the whiteness theory, Jewish people were asserted as this white aristocratic force by some hip-hoppers. This caused many Generation Xers to listen to the music through the 80s and the 90s to view Jews as these oppressive agents. As hip-hop taught self-empowerment and community reform in the spirit elegy of Malcolm X, it condemned white oppression and demanded the system to change. If Jews were white, they also practiced exploitative behaviors toward black people. As James Baldwin mentioned, the Jew profits from his status in America, and he must expect Negroes to distrust him for it. For Baldwin and others, the Jews' ability to assimilate into the dominant population and succeed in America enabled them to become part of the white race in America, the race responsible for blacks' second-class status. And so I want to kind of play, Tim Wise has this notion on whiteness theory that I wanted you to listen to.
Now we're going to let you testify in court, enter into contracts, vote, at least if you're a man, own a little at least if you're a man, right? And we're going to get rid of indentured servitude. No more of that, because you're too good for that. And you're a man, right? And we're going to. Let me say that again. The whole history of America is the history of rich white men telling not rich white people that their enemies are black and brown. It starts in the colonies of what would become the United States. Let's remember, during the colonial period, mid-1600s, there was no such thing as white people. I know some people who are now called white find that shocking, right? Because they think whiteness is real. But whiteness was created. Europeans didn't call themselves white. We didn't call ourselves white. We weren't all members of one big happy family. Are you kidding? Have you studied the history of Europe? The history of Europe was about killing each other. That's what we did in Europe. We just killed each other. But we figured out there were other people to kill. We just killed each other. I mean, that was the history of Europe. The English hated the Irish, right? Northern Italians didn't even think that Southern Italians were Italians. The Germans hated everybody. And everybody hated their ass right back. There was no team called white, no race called white, but all of a sudden, in the middle of the 1600s, there was. Why? Why was it suddenly necessary to create this thing called the white race? Well, because rich people can count, that's why. And so rich folks looked around, the ones that owned all the land, you know, in the colonies, the colonial elite looked around and they realized something, that they were heavily outnumbered by African enslaved folks, by European indentured servants, who were just one level above a slave, or other Europeans who weren't technically indentured servants, but they were still peasants, didn't have any money, didn't have any land, and they could do the math. They added it up, and they were like, damn, we got to figure out a way to split these folks apart from one another, or they're going to rise up and take our stuff, right?
I'm going to pause it there. And so in Tim Wise, he goes into the Nathaniel Bacon Rebellion, right? In the 60s, and around probably like late, like 1686 in that era, and that occurred in Virginia, but it pitted groups based on class, right? More so economically. And so Tim Wise in his argument, Dear White America, asserts that, you know, there's a reason why the whiteness category shifts, because it's an economic thing, right? And it has groups competing against each other, right? And so again, hip hoppers, yeah, we read. And so as you're reading these theories, you come to the formulation that this information is possibly true, right? All right, and then, oh, I'm sorry. Oh, yeah. And so if Jews are white people through this same lens, then again, they must be part of this white aristocracy, right? And so that is the problem that we're seeing, right? And so part of this issue is that rappers who tend to see this and adopt some of James Baldwin's, not James Baldwin, but the position that Jews are white, then they're part of this oppressive force, then it's also assumed that they have money, they have power, right? And if they have power, then we can either do two things: learn from them, right, of how to access power, right? Because part of hip hop is this bravadoism, right? It's machismo. It's braggadocious. It's talking about how much you have, right? And how much you want. So in that, there's a celebration of power, right? Like Donald Trump in the 90s, he was celebrated by hip hoppers because he had money, he had women, he's powerful, right? And so what happens, there's a divisiveness in the hip hop community. One celebrates the Jews for having their own homeland, like through Pan-Africanism, right? That Pan-Africanism taught African Americans that you need your own home to escape persecution, to escape oppression from America, right? So in that essence, by Jews having their own homeland, that is powerful. And so there are rappers who celebrate that and celebrate Zionism, say we need to do that, right? At the same time, there's others who embrace the whiteness theory, and that is where the confliction is coming in. But then if you're white and aristocratic and you have money, then you're beating capitalism, right? you have the tools and the mechanisms to know how to beat capitalism. This is all, of course, not good thinking. We know this. But this is the mindset that if they have power, then they have access. And if they have access, they have opportunity. So this is something we can learn or exploit from them. So it's no coincidence that artists like Jay-Z are at the heart of this messaging is the protocols of elders of Zion, because what it's asserting is that Jews truly know how to access, manage, and control capital. They know how to leverage power and dominate over others, right? And this trope is throughout some of the music that you will make note of that I'm going to highlight to you shortly. And we know this is a fallacy because there are a lot of Jews that don't have money and that are poor, right? But the assertion is if we model ourselves like those Jews who have power, then we have what? Access. So on Jay-Z's song to OJ, it was a song he says in there, just trying to get to the part.
Throwing away money in a strip club. Credit. You ever wonder why Jewish people own all the property in America? That's how they did it. Financial freedom, my only hope. Fuck living rich and dying broke. I bought some artwork for $1 million. 2 years later, that shit worth $2 million. Few years later, that shit worth $8 million. I can't wait to get this shit to my children. Y'all think it's bougie? I'm like, it's fine, but I'm trying to give you $1 million worth of game for $9.99. I turn a 2 to a 4, 4 to an 8. I turn my life into a night.
So again, money, right? Power, the dimension of power. And so hip hop, and I mean, who doesn't want money, right? Who doesn't want power as a young person, right? And so for many of these hip hop artists, they celebrate it. They say, look at the Jews. We could be like the Jews. We could have money. Look at how they come together and own property. But then it's a trope. It's a canard. And it's dangerous. And so I'm worried that what does it do when it's educating? Because, you know, part of conscious music is you're educating people too. I mean, again, hip hop is global. It's worldwide. Everybody's listening to Jay-Z. This song is very popular. Now, I know he got some criticism for it, as he deserved. But for him, he asserted that he was celebrating Jews having money and being powerful. He didn't see it as a knock against it. You know, that's what he was saying. But it's a trope, and it's a dangerous trope.
When was this song?
This song came out, about 2015, 16.
Wow.
Yeah. And then there's other lyrical tropes. So tropes about Jews having money and having power, right? Busta Rhymes had a lyric. He says, "We holding Jewish money now, down to the credit card, different from yours," right? The Jews have power, money. Game, moving rocks from 2 to 6. Eating on some Jewish-ish, right? Most Def, who's y'all seen, and he considered himself a black Hebrew in a song "The Rape Over." He says some tall Israeli is running this rap-ish, right? Puff Daddy, I was in the mall, and I actually used, when I heard the song, I was in the mall in South Africa, Cape Town. Of all the songs they playing in the mall, they playing "It's All About the Benjamins," right? And in that song, the artist Jadakiss, he says, we stack chips like Hebrews, right? So it's all about the Benjamins, so we have to stack these chips like the Hebrews. Meek Mill, and so I'm doing more current lyrics because oftentimes when we, younger people will say, well, Sunni, you stuck in the 80s and 90s, right? you talking about Public Enemy, man? Look, what? Right, that's what they're saying. Like, but my kid picked me up, and it's, you know, and the seats lean back, and he blasts his music. He got it from me, and then he's playing this song, "Hate Me," Meek Mill. I love Meek Mill music, and the beat. See, what's so hypnotic is the beats, y'all. Like when you hear the beats, and the anti-Semitism you don't even hear unless you grew up listening to the music. You can catch the lyrics, right? And so in the song, Meek Mills, after he kills his enemies, he says, "Look, I just put a price on your head. I get the special. You know I be hanging with Jews." In other words, I hang with Jews. Ain't nothing gonna happen to me because they got power. They know how to manipulate the system, and I'm able to get out of this situation, right? And it's a very popular song. I wish I could play that this so you could hear how the music is, even with the All About the Benjamins. Let me see. Just give me a minute. So you could just see what I mean by that.
Who is it by?
So Puff Daddy. P. Diddy. Yep. Right? And I, you know, P. Diddy, we are all fans of his. We don't want to listen to Kanye no more. I'm sorry about. There we go. I hope it ain't the movie. Yeah, this is it. Oh, this one right here. Yep. No, this is it. No, well, this is it. This is it. Yeah, this is it. Let me. Okay, I didn't want you to hear that either. Boy, this is a secular setting, right? All right, so I'm in the mall, and I mean, this the sound of. Okay, right? We flowing with this song. I know this is 1998, young people. But then he says, this is Jadakiss. You heard that, right? So this.
I didn't hear.
Oh, you hear? Okay. All right, there we go. We got our club music for the night, y'all. All right, let me do one more. And so in education, right? I know we're bringing back a curriculum. It's important to really help educate our young people about anti-Semitism. A lot of time it could be through the music, through hip hop, like how this is a trope, how this is a dangerous trope, right? All right, here's Meek Mill. So I get in the car with my kid, and just show my age. I forgot the name of the song. And it's
As long as it was a song.
Hate on Me, right? Hate on Me. Okay, let's go back. All right. Okay. Okay, so this is it. So this the beats. The beats are so much better than when I was young, right? And so it's a subconscious psychology that comes in with this music. You know what I'm saying? You're like, yeah. And so that music is so powerful when you're hearing it. So again, my kid rolls up, he's got this blast, and I'm saying, man, turn that down. So sounded like my parents, right? And why is the seat leaned back? And have you been smoking in this car? So then, as I'm listening, I'm just sitting there, and then this comes up. This lyric here. You heard that, right?
Yeah. There's a lot of stuff in there.
Yeah. Look, I'm rewinding too much, y'all. No, let me stop. You ain't hear that? All right, I'll do it one more time.
But it's also stuff about women and other Jews.
Yeah, I mean, like, he's killing people. He's taking out his enemies. He's saying power. See, that's the danger of saying power. Now, let me say that. Because those who oppress, you're tired of being marginalized. So when you develop these mindsets of power, you do anything. Especially when you're coming from these disadvantaged spaces, right? So, in a way, you know, there are definitely hip-hop artists that celebrate the power, right? They call it gangster, being gangster. Right? That by you taking over or you having this money, man, you gangster. And that's the mindset that our youth, especially in a lot of urban spaces, have. But I'll play this one more time. See, I'm hanging with Jews, I get, you know. So even when I go, even after I kill you and do all these things to you, the Jews are gonna help bail me out because I'm hanging with them.
That's what Cardi B said the same.
Yeah, Cardi B. So like these are tropes throughout the music, and so yeah. All right, so
we got some defense lawyers here talking.
No.
About, you know.
Thank you for that. No, gangster is not a good thing, you know, and so it's, you know. It's a negative. It's negative because there's so many disadvantages and harm that comes with it, right?
And gangster is not a good thing.
No, not in the real world. No, we don't want gangsters. But what I'm saying is that part of that power dimension, right, of accessing wealth and getting money, right, and overcoming your circumstance is You gangster, right? You acting gangster. So the display of guns that appear in videos, right? You really see this in drill music. Drill music is power. Drill music is where you rap about killing your enemy, and then they go out and literally do it.
What?
Yeah. That's crazy. Yeah. So, but this is this is where hip hop has devolved. I know I got only a few minutes. Let's see. All right. All right, so how do we combat this? I think that's the main thing, right? Because in its origin story, Jews were right there in helping to develop hip hop, right? They were producing it, they were helping distribute it, right? One of my favorite Jewish groups, the Beastie Boys, right? And in another group, Third Base. Third Base was very popular, and Third Base. The artist, he found Nas, right? He helped to promote Nas and distribute his music and get behind Nas. So there's a great alignment of Jews and blacks working together in this industry, which is very harmful when you hear and see this anti-Semitism. I think, and Doc, I have this one for you again. Let me see. This is Drake, right? Drake celebrates, the bar mitzvah, yeah. And I don't have it on here now, but Drake is very popular in celebrating. You know, Drake is black. I think his mom is Jewish and his father was black, And a lot of his music celebrates Judaism and celebrates being black Jew and the importance of that, just being a Jew and the pridefulness that comes with that. And so again, there's this
Canadian Jew.
And Canadian Jew, right? Canadian Jew, right? And then again, the ideal. There are many artists who see Israel as a model for African Americans, right? That we should have our own identity and land, right? And emulate what the Jews have done and going to their homeland and resurrecting that. And there's power and there's a lot of pridefulness that is viewed from African Americans who see our Jewish and brothers and sisters, because the struggles are so similar, especially when you think about the alliances that have been formed. And then I think this is where I'll wrap it up. But like Rick Ross talks a lot about the power dimension, right? But he celebrates Zionism. He celebrates the fact that you have your own economies that you run and control, right? And that's powerful, and that's something that African Americans should be striving to do. Eminem went to Israel, visited Israel. He said, man, it was so diverse. It was totally the opposite of what he thought. He thought it'd just be this religious society. He said, man, it's so diverse. Everybody's cool. And so he talks and brags about going to Tel Aviv and his music. And so there's that alliance. And I know there's this negativity out here. It's just really educating these guys about, hey, Puffy, I know you bragging, but that was a trope. Let's not do that again, right? And I think that's where our young people come in, because as you become more aware, you know to teach others and educate others not to do it. And I think that's where the improvement will come. But also bridging and re-educating, right? We know anti-Semitism is the oldest form of racism. The Nazis murdered the Jews for not being white. The Jewish faith is very diverse and global. Anti-Semitism remains strong around the world, especially in Europe. And anti-Semitism perpetuates genocide. And so when we hear anti-Semitism, we have to push back on it, because it is deadly and it is harmful. And unfortunately, we probably next. I mean, like when you hear anti-Semitism and Jews being attacked, that's a recipe for my destruction next, right? And so this is where Dr. King and civil rights leaders, we were talking at lunch and we mentioned that, when you think about the civil rights movement, Jews were right there. You think about a lot of even the most black progressive nationalist organizations like the Black Panthers, the Jews were helping to finance and support it in many ways. So, but then they're written out of history and they say, well, whites and blacks marched together. No, these were Jews that were right alongside blacks in fighting that, because they saw when many Jews came here after World War II, they saw Nazi Germany. They saw aspects of Nazi Germany with apartheid. So there's reasons why those connections can still be refueled. I think in the spirit of, I really believe in the spirit of good. Majority of African Americans, I don't believe, follow the sentiments of a Farrakhan, right? Follow the sentiments of people who have these harmful, hateful views towards Jewish people. And so they're a minority voice that has to be drowned out, and we have to constantly re-educate. And I didn't want to play what Farrakhan had to say, because you probably you've heard it, and I think Kanye said enough. And so that's my conclusion, that hip hop, it has this beautiful history. It should continue to honor the legacy of all of us as we started out with our opening exercise, right? It should capture how we overcome racial hurdles and how, we have to pay homage to Jewish artists, managers, promoters, executives who immensely contributed to the industry, and we should definitely acknowledge and continue to support and admire what our Jewish brothers and sisters have done historically. So on that note, I'll shut it down.
Thank you very much for your work and the message.
Thank you.
Appreciate it a lot. Sean.
Thank you so much for your presentation. It's a very, very important point. I think within what you're talking about is like the kind of kind of navigation and interaction within the arts industry, which is such a poignant subject to talk about right now. We look at Donald Glover's program Atlanta. It's one of the major themes going through it is the black navigation through these established economic systems, which in their history, in black American history, have historically abused them and taken advantage and devalued their labor. And so going through these systems is an incredibly complicated thing. And it really reminds me, like Nina Simone and Billie Holiday died impoverished, and these were some of the people who've contributed the most to black culture, but also to world culture. And if you look at Dave Chappelle, Dave Chappelle was forced to walk away from $500 million that he was deserved from contracts. If you look at Kendrick Lamar, he talks about getting screwed over by his accountant, and in Damn, which is like one of the most prolific rap albums ever written, I think it's got the highest pitchfork rating of any rap album ever recorded. And in there's a 45-second excerpt which is specifically talking about black Israelites and essentially also the black experience of moving through the art culture. And I think it reminds me of something that Kenneth Marcus said, talking about the connections to anti-Semitism, where essentially modern anti-Semitism can often be the manifestation of people's latent fears and anxieties about the world around them, and namely a distrust for the establishment. And so I think you can see the direct connection here between the anxiety about the establishment of like black artists and the people who consume their content and media, meeting with these vicious and like difficult themes with anti-Semitism. So I think that you put together a really good presentation of those bridges. So
Thank you.
A lot.
Thank you.
Marilyn?
Yeah, thanks so much. I think it's really refreshing to have your perspective and these examples. And really, I love teaching from popular music. So, but my question is about something David brought up, which is standpoint positionality. It's one thing for you to stand up there or sit up there and to bring this to us, and it's another thing for me to bring this kind of material in the classroom. Is that appropriate? Am I the person to do that? Do I have the right to do that even, right? So I think that there are some very sensitive issues here, which I'm teaching a course on anti-Semitism. I want to navigate with care and understanding and respect.
Yeah, I think it's perfectly fine. I think, as an educator, we're trying to use as many tools and references and resources as we can to engage our young people, right? They know this music, they listen to it. When you identify something in it that's harmful, they go, oh, I didn't know that. And the young generation, to me, is our hope and future. Right? Like, look, Mr. Farrakhan is 90 years old, y'all. You get where I'm going with this? It's our young people who will make the changes we need to have happen. And so in that spirit, we should make them aware and make ourselves aware that we're in this learning, engaged community. And you probably will be the cool teacher when you do it.
Mitchell. Sorry, Mitchell. Then.
So, I guess my question is, some of these rappers like Jay-Z and others, they have money and they have power.
Right.
So, what's the seductive draw that they would have? Because I think Jay-Z and Kanye West and others have actually spent time learning with Louis Farrakhan.
Right. Yeah.
So what's the seductiveness and the draw. If they have the money and the power, they have the platform.
Right.
What draws them to Farrakhan? And then the second part of my question would be, what's the response for those of us? This is probably more of a parenting issue than anything else, right? Because I had the same thing. I didn't realize nothing about the Benjamins until I saw it on my kids' playlist, but somehow ended up on my playlist. And I started to figure that out. And I was like, didn't you know? Didn't you hear the lyrics? And they're not listening to what.
No.
They're not listening to it either. And until you bring it to their attention. So my response as a parent is, don't buy it. Why are you buying this material? Why are you supporting this kind of hate, even if you don't? Because every dollar you're giving encourages the artist to do it again. So
I agree.
Those two questions, but Farrakhan is most important.
Yeah, well, Farrakhan, I didn't get to that in time's sake, but a lot of rappers, there was a void, at the time when the music was manifesting. A lot of the older generation, particularly civil rights era parents, were really against it. They didn't really support it as much, and so the youth were like looking for, how should I say, more elderly people or statesmen to say, hey, this is some good music. And so during like the mid 80s, when there was this conscious movement of blacks accepting, embracing Pan-Africanism, there were meetings that would happen in New York and in Chicago with Farrakhan, where he would come in and kind of validate their presence, right? And so a lot of those groups, they then begin to see him as someone they can look up to, as this person of information. He had charisma, and so that's pretty much what happened with how he first became very popular, like in the mid 80s, right? And then there was the Biggie Smalls and Tupac murder, right? So when Pac was murdered in Vegas, Biggie was murdered, there was really a gang war that happened in LA. It emerged. Farrakhan, Nation Islam went in, kind of created a peace truce at a summit in Chicago. He brought all the rappers in, and so from there he gets the stamp approval of being the sensei, right? So from the 80s, you have the mid 80s, you have groups who are like nationalist conscious groups who are looking for guidance, right? And looking for civil rights figureheads to embrace the music, and they're really not. And then you have Farrakhan to step in. So it's a vacuum, and he fills that void.
And also, just before James, on our website, on the ISGAP website, which is not so organized, but there's a film that Sunni played a key role in, looking at hip-hop and anti-Semitism, and there's a whole section with Farrakhan, his influence in music. James?
I just want to say that I really appreciate the way you gave your presentation. I don't know how many of y'all picked up on it, but he was talking about hip-hop, but his delivery of the words were rhythmic, and you could almost put a beat to what you were doing. And I'm following you that way.
I should have kept reading, man.
and so, these things actually, help to get the message across to the audiences that you need. She talked about whether or not it's appropriate. It depends on the age level, and I think that's one of the things you need to consider, because you may have to, well, I know you will have to actually review some things, because some parents will not like, I don't care how good it might be a teachable concept. Some parents would not want their students, their child, to be exposed to some of the lyrics or what have you. So you're going to have to modify it some way to teach it, but it can be done. It takes a little bit of time. I was just looking at some of my old notes on multiple intelligences, the theory of multiple intelligences by Howard Gardner, in terms of how we teach difficult subjects. And you have to go around the spiral to do that. use the music. I like the way you got us up because it's the end of the day. The bodily kinesthetic type exercise he took us through, he was preparing us to receive what he had.
All right, when I say microphone check, what do you say?
1, 2, 3.
Oh, come on, that was weak, man. Microphone check.
1, 2, 1, 2.
There we go. See, Doc, you should use that when you're trying to get their attention.
Engagement. And that's what it's all about. And if the younger generation can do that, and I just sent Jordan some research on, it's a study that USC Annenberg did on Generation X. It's a seminal study, and it's recent. It's like July, just off the just off the press. And it's talking about how young people embrace these concepts, how they get their information, what media they're looking at, and how they're consuming this information out there.
Yeah.
We have to use all of those tools at our disposal to try to get this message across.
Yeah.
Great job.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, there's more to come. Carol.
Thank you. Thank you, Sunny. Really, really interesting and refreshing. And I have a question, but I also want to share that my students, so I teach about anti-black racism, but when my students come and I teach about representations in the media of all sorts of oppressed groups in the US, but my students at the end of the course really, really ask me, can you please teach about Kanye West, anti-Semitism? And I'm scared because they don't know how to channel it and how to bring it to the class. So you helped me a lot, as I want to say. I wanted to ask you, so you did touch a little bit about this, but if I'm trying to understand anti-Semitism here, is it, so Jewish people are not the most powerful group in the United States, right?
Right.
But they're still being taken as like an example of being powerful and like successful. So I'm trying to think, is it scapegoating as we started to think about it like in the last couple of days? Is it jealousy? Is it admiration? I don't know, or identification, so they identify with the Jews and really hope to be like them? Or is it like scapegoating the Jews and then you're starting to understand another thing about anti-Semitism? I don't know, so just wanted to...
Yeah, I see it as not, well, Puff Daddy, I think he's more or less identifying and seeing the power in that. So I don't think, but it's a trope, right? Whereas other rappers who are mean-spirited, they mean it a different way. Give you an example, Ice Cube, he mentioned something in the 90s about the owner of NWA Records, who Jerry Helen, who was Jewish and was a Jew, and he said, based on the exploitation that happened with NWA, that kind of confirmed what he had been hearing all along, right, in that kind of hip-hop community among these African scholars that taught this anti-Semitism. So it confirmed that, and so he just went ballistic with this anti-Semitic vitriol toward Jerry Helen and Jews. But again, look, Jerry Helen is one producer manager. There are a lot of black managers and producers that also exploit their artists, right? And so just to single one person, I think from the conference we heard, when a Jewish person does something, right, extraordinary, or maybe he's done, because we're fallible, we're human, then now we're going to make you the poster child for everyone and say this is how Jews act. And so that's problematic.
So, but before you, just a quick comment. Also, the stereotypes of Jews and people of African or African American, Black Americans, criminality and anti-Semitism and racism go hand in hand.
Yep.
There's a whole legacy of that.
Yep.
And I'm a little, I get there. So the two Harlan and Carolyn, you expressed concern kind of from a place of respect, not to step on the toes. Like how do you critique anti-Semitism coming out of the African American music genres, right, of contemporary music? And maybe you can help me. But I think if we're scholars, and scholars of anti-Semitism, let's say, or anything, any other racism, sexism, and we see manifestations of it coming from a certain sector of society, I think, in a respectful way, I think we have to engage it and analyze it and do it. And I don't know if there's like a false.
It's challenging because the minority, like I teach also about Islamophobia, and I'm cautious when I teach or want to teach about anti-Semitism that comes from Muslim community. So I'm not saying not to teach it. I'm just saying that I'm cautious. So
I get it. So I think this is, to me, this is very important. And then I'll turn it over to you. I think in the position that Jews, American Jews in particular, are being put into or occupy, puts us in this sort of almost like a false liberal space. We can't criticize certain things, otherwise we're going to be labeled what we already said we're labeled as. We all acknowledge that we're white and privileged, the progressive Jews, and yet we can't speak to, and I'm choosing my words carefully, we can't speak to genocidal anti-Semitism that fuses a very kind of perversion of Islam with the legacy of European genocidal anti-Semitism and fascism and Nazism. What the Muslim Brotherhood is doing, not Muslims and not Islam, but the Muslim Brotherhood, political Islam, it takes European Nazism and it's engaged in trying to every day carry out today, as we speak, an extermination of Jews. This is their goal, and they're at work.
So what is your advice?
They're at work. So as scholars, I don't think we can be put in a box or put against the wall. I think we have to, we have to be committed to scholarship and maybe even put these personal social considerations aside and stand up and engage it. And then, and if I'm wrong, you should challenge me, or we should be, or if you agree with me, we should be challenged. But I think this sort of false liberalism is so dangerous. And it's so dangerous in the sense that we are silencing ourselves. We can't be silent. We cannot be silent. This is our history. We know from our history what happens when we're silent. We know. We know. And our history is not, it's not from 1,000 years ago. We know from our parents and from our grandparents. We grew up with this lesson. This is how we grew up. We know not to be silent. And yet, in the Jewish community, particularly in the United States, I would argue, more so than any other diaspora community, we are censoring ourselves. We're silencing ourselves. And it's not easy. Marilyn, Carolyn, it's not an easy situation, but I think we have to, build a strategy and a consciousness, like how do we walk the tightrope? How do we be true to our scholarship and to social justice and to fighting hatred? It's not easy.
No, I agree with that.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I agree. I think we have to be brave, be truthful with each other. We have to have critical conversations, right? Critical conversations. And so music is one way of bringing this into a school space, right? We have plenty of literature, but there's ways that we could engage our students through this very multimedia approach, right? I think social media is huge in terms of even what's on, oh boy, my memory, but what's out there in social media and TikTok, right? These are things that could be infused in our classroom curriculum to have students do their own research and investigation, right? Like, hey, here's a list of songs, go through it, see what you find is anti-Semitic, come back, why is that a problem? Let's do a breakout group, Socratic, whatever, and reflect on those issues you heard in the music.
Oh, I just wanted to, I guess, reference like why they would be aspirational or say they want to be like the Jewish people, even though it's not you know, they might not be the richest groups, and even though he might already be wealthy and powerful, because I think one of the main criticisms from black people of Jay-Z is like, oh, you can't relate to me, or like, you're a one-off, like, I could never be where you are. And so I think with him being at the top, he wants to see more people that look like him around him. And then like within Jewish communities, you're known for like working together. They'll say like, it's the same, it's like the dollar turns around this many times within the Jewish community, because they all share and work together, and there's this sense of community. So I think that's what the more admiration is. I mean, there are definitely tropes and problematic things, but the admiration aspect is like, okay, I want us to do this as a community, and like my manager, why can't we be financially literate? Why are we just the talent all the time, you know?
Right.
So
Yeah,
that's
it.
where that's coming from.
Yep. Yeah, that's good.
One of my criticisms is that black people don't work together, you know, for the good of the whole community.
Naomi, then.
I just sort of want to go back, and I thought you just actually offered a good strategy for this, but I really appreciate, first of all, I really appreciated the presentation, and we
Thank
actually have like a hip hop major in my university, so I want to
Good.
talk about and talking. But I sort of wanted to talk about this idea of the brave space, because I don't want to presume what Marilyn or Carolyn were saying, but I know for me, like, it's a lot easier for me to be really brave as a scholar, or like in a meeting at my university where I have to stand up. But sometimes I feel like, as, you know, just to talk about standpoint positionality, like as, you know, a Jewish woman saying to black students, like, hey, listen to this music that's anti-Semitic. That's, I think, a challenge for me. And it's not just on that particular topic, but it's where I sort of feel like this is a place where it gets really personal. Like I'm talking about, you know, Israel, Palestine, and like, you know, my Palestinian students are sitting like right in front of me, and I think that's kind of a place of challenge sometimes. And I wondered if you had, you know, any thoughts on that, sort of navigating that? Like, some of it is building trust in the classroom, but
Yeah, I think when we build community in our classroom, we democratize it. When we democratize spaces, that means everyone has a voice. It's equity of voice. In our instructional delivery, we should always be mindful of how do we differentiate the instruction so that it's inclusive of the voices that are diverse in our classroom settings, right? And so empowering students in our classrooms is so important in a democratic space, right? In other words, yes, I'm the facilitator of this instruction, but ultimately you're doing the homework. The teacher is not the hardest practitioner in that space. So you're doing the homework. I'm setting up the investigations for you to explore, to come back and tell me what you've learned and what you've gained from it, right? So part of that UDI or backwards design says, you know, and I think this is the problem, that, okay, here's some themes that intersect, and how can we learn from those intersections and themes that are emerging from this space that we are all investigating, right? But then we diminish. The problem with thematic teaching is that you're not really getting into the history that needs to be extrapolated and detailed and sequenced, right? Because we're so focused on these thematic concepts. But I think in the spirit of like having students do the work and giving them the structure, like, hey, again, you know, let's talk about contemporary anti-Semitism and how we find it in our society. And here's some hip hop songs. Oh man, we want to listen to hip hop. All right, I want you to go through the lyrics and see where you find possibly some anti-Semitism, and tell me what you think, and get a conversation. And that's where our teachable moments can come in.
So that's reflection. And a lot of people tend to not use reflection in instruction. But reflection is a good way to make it personal to the learner.
Right. And this generation, they're not with and I don't want to speak for you guys, but they don't like all that hatred and you talking down on someone and you making someone feel bad. No, they're gonna check that. Right?
Oh, can I say something?
Yeah.
Okay, but as a future educator myself, I do think it's really important to show the significance of like different cultures of music, and especially like hip hop, because there's so much more that goes into it, and there's such a big window that shows like what people are celebrating, what they're commenting on, and just like, you know, understanding kind of what's going on within the world. And I think that's really important, and it's cool. And I liked your presentation, so my eyes didn't even droop or anything. I was like,
Are you admitting they were drooping earlier? No, let me stop.
I just was going to say, I also love using music in classes, especially freshman seminar. I think it's so fun and engaging. And I do try to use like a lot of examples. You know, I'm in a really homogenous community. A lot of folks don't know a person, a non-Christian person. I mean, like to be an agnostic is something so radical in my community. So I try to tell stories, I think, when I'm engaging, to your point too. I'm like, oh, you're Christian. Is this, like, does Westboro Baptist Church represent you? Like, does David Koresh represent you? Like, to get into those spaces around extremism. And they're like, oh, no, that's not that. So when we're talking about extremism, they have an example to work from.
Right.
So I think that's really fun. Also, it's super fun when I'm talking about music to talk about the Appalachian experience, and I know this is like just me and two other people in the room, maybe marginally, but you know, people really think of like old time and bluegrass as like this quintessentially white rural thing, but the banjo came with the enslavement of West African peoples, and when I'm telling my students, I'm like, actually, you really don't know. Like, let's be ready to be wrong, and that was the basis of rhythm and blues, and that is like a profound contribution from the enslavement of these people, and you don't acknowledge that, and that's like, oh, they're like, okay. And then last thing, just for a bit of levity, I always thought that line in All About the Benjamin was snack chips. And Naomi just reminded me, actually, that is like maybe the most Jewish thing ever.
Thanks. Brenda?
Oh, that's funny.
Brenda, is it? No, did you want to say something? No? Did you want to say something?
No,
sorry.
Yes, no.
Okay, no. Please.
Oh, I'm
Well,
sorry.
it was a great presentation, and I've been sitting by you the entire week, and so it's great. I was just so proud.
Oh,
It was
thank
wonderful.
you.
You did such a wonderful job. And so my question is, don't you think a lot of times the kids who are listening to these songs don't really always pay attention to the lyrics?
No.
And how dangerous is this subliminal message? I look back at songs that I might have listened to, much different type of music, but you know, I look at the lyrics and I go, is that what that said? You know, because I was more into the song itself and to the music than I was actually the message. And so do you think that's really kind of the case in the
Oh yeah, it's subconscious. There's a whole conversation about music and subconsciousness and, you know, subliminal messaging. Especially the beats are hypnotic. You know, you listen to those beats, it's like, whoa, right? And even the guy was out on the, you know, just walking, and he put on the beat, and I said, oh, I gotta go back and hear this guy rap, right? And it was just crowds of people just attracted to the music, but the beat, and it's hypnotic. And when it's hypnotic, that's when your subconscious mind opens. So there are things being implanted in them you're not even aware of, right? So our kids like the beats, right? But then listening to the actual lyrics, that's different.
From my experience on it, like, I'm certainly like a victim of not listening to lyrics. Like, I do just like the beat, and like I'll put a song on my playlist if it sounds good. I don't even know what it's about yet. I talked to some of my friends, and I'm like, because it seems like Kanye West is trending on Twitter like every month with something problematic that he's doing, and somehow it'll come up with my friends, and they still listen to him. And I said, but like, what about like XYZ, the things he's done, like things he said about women, and then the anti-Semitic things he said, and they're like, yeah, I know, but like, this album is still one of the best albums in music history. Like, you can't deny that. And so, I think some of them are listening to the lyrics, but they don't care.
Yeah.
Because there's things that are just more important to them. And so, would you try to tell them to stop listening to those artists altogether, to stop giving them those, like, that money from it? Or,
Yeah, that's a good.
Where do they go on from after that?
I don't know. That's complex. You know, like you educate yourselves, right? Like, look, the first 3 Kanye albums. I'm not gonna lie, I listened to it, right? But I think like in educating ourselves about the hatred and anti-Semitism, that's when we have to push back. And I'm disappointed in him. I'm you know, the fact is that he wore a shirt which white people matter, right? White lives matter, right? Which is true, but then you say Jews are white. Like, it's just a contradiction. So, yeah, slavery was like, come on, man, dude, I gave up on you.
Naya, then Janice.
Okay.
I have a question. I had to teach the Harlem Renaissance poetry.
Yes.
And I found this poem by Langston Hughes called "The Negro Speaks of Rivers."
Yeah.
So beautiful.
Yeah.
And so as I was researching, I had researched you mentioned Pan-African. So can you, I thought Pan-Africanism, and please correct me, 'cause, okay, is this idea that of the black indigeneity, almost like black people are indigenous to the African continent. Is that wrong?
No, that's part of it. Yep.
Oh, okay.
Yep, definitely. And that we should reclaim our homeland, trace our lineage, identity back to Africa, and build up Africa and invest. Very similar
And
to.
when did it come up? When did it rise around?
Well, Pan-Africanism as an ideal, it goes back to like 1780s, to be honest with you. There were free black societies that, like Deacon Henry Charter, he was from Boston area. They were or Paul Coffey, they were very, we need to go back to Africa. And so even in 1820, that's when you had James Monroe say, hey, we can, I believe in immigration, so Liberia becomes the homeland initially. And then you also have Marcus Garvey rebirthed those ideas. Martin Delany in the 1850s. Martin Delany was a Pan-Africanist in the 1850s and spoke about going back to Africa and rebuilding our roots there. So yeah, it's always been a sojourn question of, if we are in America, we are despised, oppressed. I was hearing earlier when one of the professors said, well, America is the homeland, it was the safety net for Jews, right? For African Americans, we don't really see it that way. As Chris Rock said, I'm quoting Chris Rock, if you look at America, you got to look at America a little different. You got to look at it as an uncle who paid for you to finish school but molested you. Right, so like the thorns that America has given African Americans over the years is we have a different lens in how we view the nation, right? So
there's a beautiful article on our website by Ansel Brown on Pan-Africanism and Zionism.
Yeah.
So, Jenny's. Okay, final comment, Lev, and then.
I will just continue your question and raise a comparative aspect. Should we keep listening to it? And I ask myself, should we keep reading and seeing plays by Shakespeare? Shakespeare had some anti-Semitic comments. It's on the same way.
Yeah.
So I'm asking what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, in our fallibilities, we take the good and the bad, the ugly, right? It's a personal decision. Like, I'm, disappointed, disgusted with Kanye. I feel like I'm boycotting him. And then I hear the song, Good Morning. And I'm like, whoa, wow, like this song, and I can't turn from it, right? So it's problematic, and it's an individual kind of decision. Because, he is very talented, but then, I can't excuse some of his rhetoric and behavior either, so.